Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome again to another episode on Talk Architecture. And this time, this monologue that I will have for you is intending to explain why we started conversations on architecture education and some of the ideas that came from our conversation with Kevin Matlow. It is important at this juncture to realize essential things and not be confused about this matter. I like to use the word collaboration before because I was trying to find the correct word. And it's essentially leadership qualities that a student of architecture need to develop and later be able to be a leader in a consultants group or the project architect role or steering his or her own um, practice or being a director in a company, anything at all that has to do with practicing. So these leadership qualities is essential because the role of the architect is to lead a project. And if the architect doesn't lead a project, if it's design and build and the focus is on the contractor, they still need to lead certain characteristic or certain things in the project. There's essentially their skills to do with design and architecture. So there was a comment that I made on collaboration earlier, and it was based on how the students that we had in the design thesis said, after I asked them how much of a collaboration or how much of an influence does the tutor have on their project, and they answered from 50% to 70%. Never was it 100% that the tutor lead that project. Obviously, they need to lead that project. That's the evidence that we got from that discussion after interviewing a few students. So this is the earlier podcast interviews that I had on Talk Architecture. And you can find that in the earlier episodes. So going back into this essential skill of leadership, I mentioned here that there are essentially three skills that one should have, which is adaptability, number one. Number two, understanding context and the fit. And number three, steering or, captaining or leading the project based on processes which are relevant to the task at hand. So there are these three things that I concluded, and also the importance of a lecturer to know how to guide. That's the very least of the skills that they need to have as a lecturer. They have so many other skills now. Higher education asks them to be a researcher, research project leader, shall we say, a writer, an author. So an architecture lecturer essentially needs to know how to guide and quote unquote teach a student of architecture. So that is under the collaboration that I'm trying to explain earlier. The teacher or the lecturer is not the leader of the student's project. It is wrong if they start instructing the students as if the student is an assistant architect in the project team. So there have been some confusion about this pedagogy model. We did talk about the balance model of education, and we touched on many things. But what is essentially important is that the student of architecture leads their own project. It started with the first year, and even in the first year, in the very first project, the student needs to lead with their ideas, with their research, or with their understanding of the project or the task at hand. Subsequently, in the final year, when they have to even come up with the brief themselves, which is something that I haven't done before, from year 1 to year 4, and in the Masters of Architecture Design thesis final project, often the student of architecture need to design their own brief. So these three essential skills that I mentioned earlier is that the skill to adapt is that suddenly, hey, this is no more a brief coming from the lecturer. Before you're filling in the gaps in terms of creating or interpreting the client's brief, but now you have to come up with a totally new brief. And then you have to be able, when you're adaptable, you'll be able to ask the right questions. Asking the right questions regard to the topic. You say you want to do a school, or you want to do a library, or you want to do a digital media center, whatever it is that, a museum of folk art. So there have to be like some essential reading and understanding about that topic, and then suddenly you ask the bigger questions. So when you ask the bigger questions, this is when people think that it is a research framework, but this is totally to do with design when asking a bigger question. It's not to do with writing a publication. When you write a publication, when you do a research project, you're asking questions as well, because you're trying to get more readings to come up with a problem statement. Now, this is different. This is to do with you essentially do need to problem solve, do need to come up with solutions to the topic, and your role is to design. Your role is to actually come up with not a set of guidelines, but something that is, asking questions about the system or the open system thinking rather than a factory like process. You're asking to layer a lot of knowledge and asking the big questions about your topic. It could be something with the site. When you went to the site, it's like there is a highway next to it. There's problems linking it to the community. So you even have to think about how to make it accessible walking, not driving. If you're in essentially thinking about not necessarily everybody have a car, so your building that you're designing is like a marketplace maybe, and you need to actually link to the residential area. So that is one problem that you need to solve. There are other problems regarding, like if you're a community center or a market or a public facility, what is the thing that it function as in terms of like a market? You have like a social interaction agenda where people can come and not only they buy their daily needs, they actually meet their friends and stuff like that, or a library where they could browse or research, or children would like to do something for the assignment. I know nowadays you're gonna say, yeah, we have everything on the phone, but you need to have choices to use the environment and to get face-to-face interaction, and it's beside the point, really, when you talk about accessibility to information. So, the adaptability to actually adapt to the situation where suddenly you need to skill up, you need to actually find ways and means, is what is the word for that leadership skill. And I was trying to actually understand what the original poster Azari mentioned about leadership skills. We need to break it down to adaptability skills. And number two is understanding context and the fit. I mean, just now I mentioned about open system thinking, quote unquote, from Kevin, because I was just talking about system thinking, open system thinking on layering, reading things. And reading means could also be interviewing, reading the person, or interviewing a user, or how a cleaner would clean the place. There are so many people who is going to use your building. And so context, meaning people, not necessarily just the surrounding environment. And context meaning uh, what are you actually designing for? And then the fit would be your solution to it. So you are able to be a leader of your project because you know exactly what you need to do to understand the context as you go along designing and understanding your design. And the third one is you know what processes need to be done and what is relevant to the task at hand. So if you're doing a market or library or community center or museum, you have to learn about other case studies of similar projects. And it's best if you visited. You can even find information about how it came about, what are the issues, and what the previous architect to that project had to do in order to come up with a solution. So that's basically what student of architecture has to do. And then, student of architecture, usually when they are doing their studies, you have a lecturer or several lecturers, a team of studio tutors that need to guide them. And you essentially have meetings with them, such as in a desk crit or a group crit, interim crit, any crits, discussion in the studio or online. So the lecturer also need to have a set of skills where they know how to guide the student, and they know that the student need to lead the project and have those other skills as well. So they just basically need to point out to the student, you got to understand about the context and the fit. When you're doing the client's brief on your own, you need to be able to know how to research for things. So they guide the student, and I'd expect you to come up with some, shall we say, some basic questions to ask about your project the next time I meet you. And then when the student don't understand that, when they meet up with the lecturer again the next week, they are still confused. So you will give more guidance. And, it's always a challenging thing not to instruct the students as if you are the leader of the project. You are a guide. And that's basically what you are. And so that's the collaboration with the student. The student may think you have influence 50%. They have done 50%, you have done 50%. I mean, you are a big influence. Or if the student, this is from my research earlier, if the student thinks they're doing 70%, you're doing 30%. You were influential. And sometimes students would say, no, they were not influenced at all by the lecture. They did everything on their own. They did 100%. So that's what I'm trying to say when there is a collaboration with the student, the percentage of it. So student of architecture learn how to lead and be the driver of his or her project. And this will be repeated in the future. And Kevin Malo mentioned about false confidence or fake confidence, where they're given the wrongs of guidance and they were not given guidance at all, or they pick up bad habits of being influenced by influences rather than being, shall we say, thinking on their own or be critical or asking those questions. They did not believe in asking those questions, so it's more like merely following the trend or following influences who are not really proper mentors or guide, but they think that's the right way, and they went about dealing things like that. And when they have problems when they are in working with somebody else, they couldn't lead. They not able to lead a project, and that their false sense of confidence earlier after School of Architecture, when they are in practice, it's not helping them. So that's the problem. That's right there. That's a problem which we identified happens in schools of architecture, in particular in Malaysia. So with that false confidence, they don't even not. It's even worse that they can't even collaborate with other people and consultants. Not they can't even do that. Lead their own project. What more other consultants and mindful of, shall we say, accountability that was highlighted by Ramesh earlier in a previous podcast, as well as mentioned. They do not understand accountability and the importance of that. Being an architect, the false sense of confidence is very wrong when you don't even know how to construct the building properly. It's very wrong when you have missing information or not able to communicate properly. So that is like the downfall of the School of Architecture and the attitude and the approach. So that's why we need to go back to design rather than research framework. Schools of architecture need to go back to the basics and the fundamentals. So that one was the Ramesh Seshan's concern. So we will have more on that later in detail. But the reason I'm having this podcast to conclude some thoughts that I'll be having, and also the future publication on this topic, which is to do with my conversations with Kevin Matlow. All right, and thank you very much for listening to this episode. Take care.